The city stretched beneath him like a jeweled map, rivers of light running between towers of glass, but Rick Sullivan wasn't looking at the skyline. He was looking at his reflection. The black marble table was polished to perfection, a mirror for the man who believed he owned the room. His cufflinks glinted with platinum edges. His suit was tailored so precisely it seemed stitched onto his skin, and on his wrist sat a Patek Philippe worth more than most people's houses. He tilted it slightly, letting the light catch, a small reminder to anyone who saw him. I stand above you. The 52nd floor of Sullivan Tech headquarters was more than an office. It was a shrine to wealth. The walls bore paintings older than the country itself. A chandelier dripped crystal fire onto a carpet so thick it swallowed footsteps whole. The air was chilled, humming with quiet power, as though even oxygen cost more here. Visitors rarely lasted long without feeling smaller, weaker. That was by design. Rick thrived on it. Send them in, he said, his voice sharp into the gold-plated intercom. Yes, Mr. Sullivan. Carmen Johnson and her daughter are here, his secretary replied, words clipped, nervous. The glass doors slid open with a whisper. Carmen pushed the cleaning cart forward, its wheels squeaking faintly against the heavy carpet. Her uniform, neat and pressed, carried the scent of bleach and soap that clung no matter how hard she scrubbed it away. Beside her walked a thin girl, no more than 12, her shoes polished though they were worn at the edges, a backpack resting carefully on her shoulders. She took in the office with wide eyes, not with awe, but with calculation, as though she were measuring every line of stone, every reflection of glass, every secret the walls might have hidden from her mother all these years. Rick leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a smile that wasn't really a smile. It was a blade hidden in velvet. Well, well, he drawled, rising slowly. 8 years, Carmen. 8 years in my tower, and here you are, still pushing that cart. Carmen lowered her eyes. Her voice was quiet, almost apologetic. Yes, sir. 8 years. He circled them, each step deliberate, like a predator tracing the edge of its prey. High school, wasn't it? That's as far as you got? He didn't wait for her nod. His laugh was sharp, metallic, echoing against marble and glass. 8 years cleaning for people smarter than you. That's what happens when education ends with a mop. Carmen swallowed hard, fingers tightening on the cart's handle. Shame burned in her chest, but she had lived too many years by making herself small, absorbing cruelty without protest. She could survive another cut, or so she thought. Rick's gaze shifted, landing on the girl. His smile thinned. And this must be your daughter. He tilted his head, eyes gleaming with a cruel playfulness. The little colored girl learning how to dream big. The words fell heavy, casual but deadly, laced with centuries of venom. The kind that didn't shout but sliced deeper because of the ease with which it was said. Carmen's shoulders bent, instinctively shielding her daughter from humiliation, but the girl didn't shrink. Lucia lifted her chin. Her eyes weren't angry, just steady, sharp as glass. Rick saw it, that tiny spark, and it made his own smile stretch wider. He smelled defiance, and nothing fed his hunger more than the chance to crush it. He leaned closer, voice low, taunting. Do you know where you are, little girl? This floor isn't for people like you. It's for men like me. Men who understand power. Men who laugh when others pretend they can rise. The air grew taut, stretched like a wire ready to snap. Carmen stood frozen, praying her daughter would stay silent, that she wouldn't make things worse. But Lucia's silence wasn't surrender. It was something else, something Rick couldn't yet see. And as he circled them, his shadow long against the polished floor, he thought he was in control. He thought he was about to enjoy the same old game, remind the invisible they were invisible. What he didn't know, what he couldn't even begin to imagine, was that the girl in the polished shoes and worn backpack carried a weapon far sharper than the blades in his words. And before this day ended, on this very floor where he had mocked kings and silenced competitors, Rick Sullivan would be the one left speechless. Rick's laugh bounced off the glass walls like a cruel echo, sharp and metallic, meant to cut through whatever fragile courage remained in the room. Carmen kept her eyes lowered, fighting the familiar sting of shame that always came with standing in this office. She had scrubbed these floors, polished these railings, wiped dust from paintings she could never afford to even dream of, and not once had anyone asked her name as if it mattered. To Rick, she was just the cleaner. To everyone else on the 52nd floor, she was invisible. But today was different. Today, her daughter stood beside her. And invisibility doesn't work when there are eyes filled with defiance standing next to you. Rick circled slowly, one hand slipping into his pocket, the other tapping the edge of his gold watch against the marble desk, each click a reminder of power, wealth, dominance. He enjoyed this, the performance of intimidation. Every gesture was practiced, rehearsed 1,000 times in boardrooms and negotiations where silence and fear gave him the victory. He stopped behind Carmen and leaned slightly forward, his breath grazing the air near her ear. "Tell me, Carmen," he said, his tone deliberately slow. "Do you ever imagine what it would have been like if you'd gone beyond high school, if you'd had the courage to dream bigger, or was scrubbing toilets always the end goal?" The words sliced into her, sharper than broken glass. Carmen's lips trembled, but she didn't answer. She had survived 8 years by staying quiet, by never fighting back. Yet even as her silence shielded her, she felt her daughter's eyes burning into her side. Rick moved away, circling again, and this time his attention locked on Lucia. His smile carried no warmth. It was the smile of a cat staring at a bird. "And you," he said softly, "you must be learning from your mother's example. Dreams are dangerous, you know. Especially for little girls like you." Lucia didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her voice calm but clear. "Dreams aren't dangerous. People who mock them are." The air shifted instantly. Even the steady hum of the air conditioner seemed to hesitate. Carmen's heart thudded painfully. "Lucia," she whispered, but her daughter didn't move, didn't break. Rick blinked, just once, his grin faltering before snapping back in place. He chuckled, but it wasn't the confident laugh of a man in control. It was harsher, louder, a cover for the crack she had just made in his armor. "Sharp tongue," he sneered. "Public school must be teaching you to talk back now. Tell me, do they also teach you how the world really works? Do they teach you that girls like you don't climb these stairs?" He took a step closer, his shadow stretching across her small frame. "Intelligence, power, wealth, it's inherited, passed down, written in blood. And with your skin, with your background, you'll never own anything higher than a mop bucket." Carmen's chest tightened. She had heard cruelty before, but spoken to her daughter like this, it was unbearable. She reached for Lucia's hand, but the girl gently pulled away. Lucia's chin lifted. Her voice was quiet, steady, but carried the weight of something that silenced even the sneer on Rick's lips. "Maybe intelligence is inherited," she said. "If so, I inherited it from my mother, not you." Rick froze. For a moment, the room lost its shape. He saw not a little girl, but a mirror, one that reflected every arrogance he had ever built his empire on. And the terrifying part was that the mirror wasn't cracking. His grin returned, sharper, colder. "We'll see," he whispered. "Oh, we'll see." And with that, he reached for the bundle of yellowed pages on his desk, an ancient manuscript he had kept as a trophy, a puzzle that had mocked every scholar he had hired. He laid it on the marble table, the brittle parchment whispering as it opened. His eyes gleamed with anticipation. This was no longer just about humiliation. This was going to be a spectacle, a game, and Rick Sullivan always played to win. Rick slid the manuscript across the polished marble like it was a weapon disguised as paper. The bundle of parchment was bound loosely with a faded leather strap, its edges frayed and brittle with time. To him, it wasn't just an old relic. It was a stage, the perfect trap for a child who didn't know when to keep her head down. He rested his hand on the yellowed pages, tapping them with the tip of his finger. "This," he said, his voice low, deliberate, dripping with satisfaction, "is a prize I bought at an auction in Paris. Scholars called it a linguistic labyrinth. 6 ancient languages, each more impossible than the last. Classical Chinese, Arabic, Sanskrit, Hebrew, Persian, medieval Latin. He tilted his head toward Lucia, eyes gleaming. 5 top translators in this city gave up after weeks. Men with PhDs, white men with walls full of certificates. And you, he said with a thin smile, you think you can even begin to touch this? Carmen froze, her blood rushing in her ears. She looked at the parchment as though it carried fire. Even she knew the names of those languages. They were words spoken in ivory towers, places she had never stepped into, places barred to women like her. She shook her head quickly, whispering, "Sir, she's only a child." Rick cut her off with a sharp laugh that echoed against the glass walls. "Exactly, Carmen, a child. But your little girl here seems to think she's special. Better to learn young that the world doesn't bend for children wit. It's big mouths." Lucia stepped forward, small hands pressing against the edge of the marble table. She studied the manuscript not with fear, but with a strange stillness, her eyes moving over the curling ink strokes that wandered like rivers across the page. Rick leaned closer, his smile wolfish. "Go ahead," he taunted. "Read it, prove you're different, or admit what we both know. You're nothing but the daughter of a cleaning woman, and you'll end up pushing that cart just like her." The room was so silent Carmen could hear her own pulse pounding. She wanted to drag her daughter out, to end this humiliation before it carved scars too deep to heal. But when she looked at Lucia's face, she saw no fear. The girl's eyes were calm, steady, unshaken. Lucia's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. "You said the translators couldn't read it," she said, looking up at Rick. "Can you?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Rick blinked, caught off guard. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, sharper than before. "I don't waste my time with dead languages," he snapped. "I hire people for that. I'm a businessman. I buy knowledge. I don't need to read it." Lucia tilted her head, her voice even softer now. "Then you don't understand it either. Yet you mock others for not being able to. Money isn't proof of intelligence." Rick's face flushed a dangerous red. For the first time, the marble floor felt unsteady beneath him. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by a child. The hum of the air conditioner suddenly felt too loud, like the room itself was holding its breath. He slammed his hand down on the manuscript. "Enough! If you're so smart, then show me." He shoved the brittle pages closer. "Read it. Right here. Right now. Show me what money can't buy." Carmen gasped, reaching for her daughter's arm. "Lucia, don't!" But the girl stepped forward, her hand brushing against the ancient parchment. She traced the curling lines with the tip of her finger, eyes narrowing with focus. Her lips parted, and in that moment, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Rick's cruel grin widened. He thought he was about to watch a child fall apart, stammering nonsense. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't even begin to imagine, was that the silence about to be broken would not belong to him. And when her voice finally rose, speaking in a language older than the stones beneath Manhattan, the entire 52nd floor would never be the same. The silence hung heavy like the pause before a storm. Rick leaned back slightly, his grin curling into something crueler, ready to pounce when the little girl stumbled. Carmen's hands trembled on the cart, her knuckles white, whispering prayers under her breath. But Lucia did not tremble. She didn't even blink. Her small hand rested gently on the parchment, as though the paper itself recognized her touch. Then she looked up at Rick, her chin lifting a fraction higher, her eyes unwavering. "You think I'm lying," she said softly. "You think because I am young, because I am black, because my mother cleans your floors, I cannot know what you don't." Rick's laugh burst out, sharp and metallic, bouncing off the glass walls. "You? Knowing more than me? Little girl, even professors couldn't crack this. And you're what, 12? He turned to Carmen, shaking his head in mock pity. "You've raised her to live in delusion. That's dangerous." But Lucia didn't flinch. She drew in a calm breath and began, her voice steady, deliberate. "I speak 9 languages." Rick froze. His smile twitched at the corners, disbelieving. He laughed again, louder this time, trying to cover the sudden crack in his confidence. 9? 9 languages? That's a good one. He slapped his palm against the marble table. You expect me to believe a poor little girl from public school can do what scholars can't? 9 languages? That sounds like clickbait. Lucia's gaze didn't waver. She began ticking them off on her fingers, her tone crisp, each word pronounced perfectly, each accent exact. Spanish, English, Mandarin, Arabic, French, Portuguese, Italian, German, Russian. Each syllable landed like a nail hammered into silence. Rick's smirk faltered. Carmen's breath caught. She had known her daughter was bright, but this was beyond her imagination. Tears pricked her eyes, but she stayed still, afraid that even the smallest sound might break this moment. Rick scoffed, forcing his laugh again, but it sounded thinner now. Cute, very cute, a parlor trick. You can say their names. That doesn't mean you know them. Lucia tilted her head. Do you want proof? She asked simply. Her voice was not defiant. It wasn't angry. It was steady, like she was inviting him into a truth he wasn't ready to face. Rick's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, his expensive cologne sharp in the air, his words hissing through clenched teeth. Yes, prove it. Right here, right now. Lucia's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. Spanish, she began, and a stream of flawless sentences spilled out. Smooth, melodic, natural. She didn't hesitate, didn't stumble. The words rolled like she was born in Madrid, each consonant sharp, each vowel rich with rhythm. Before Rick could even interject, she switched to French, her tone shifting, light and graceful. She spoke with the elegance of Paris, her voice carrying an accent so precise it pulled the sound of Europe into the sterile Manhattan air. Then she shifted again, this time into Mandarin, her tones crisp, exact, her voice rising and falling with the delicate rhythm that even seasoned learners failed to master. Carmen's mouth fell open, stunned as the strange, beautiful sounds flowed from her daughter's lips. Arabic followed, liquid, lyrical, curling like a desert wind across the room. Then German, firm and strong, Portuguese, smooth as music, Italian, warm and rolling, Russian, sharp and commanding. One after another, 9 rivers of language poured out of her, each distinct, each alive, each undeniable. The office that had once swallowed footsteps in silence now felt like it was trembling under the weight of her voice. Rick's jaw dropped. He snapped it shut, then opened it again like a fish yanked out of cold water. He looked around as though the marble walls might confirm what his ears had just heard. But no wall, no chandelier, no $1,000,000 painting could protect him now. For the first time in years, Rick Sullivan was not the man in control of the room. He was the one cornered, and the one holding the power, the one commanding every breath in that office, was the little black girl he had thought invisible. Rick's laughter had died in his throat, but he forced the sound out again, harsher this time, like a man trying to hold on to a crumbling mask. Cute, he muttered, his words sharp but thinner than before. Anybody can memorize a few phrases, repeat them like a parrot, and make fools believe. But fluency? Real understanding, that takes years. Don't think you can fool me, little girl. Lucia's eyes didn't shift. Her expression was calm, steady, as though his words barely grazed her. She set her hands gently on the edge of the marble desk, her voice softer now, but soft in the way water wears down stone. I don't need to fool you. The proof is in the learning, not in the mocking. Rick's jaw tightened. Carmen stood frozen, torn between fear and awe, her chest rising and falling as if she was the one fighting for air. She wanted to shield her daughter, to beg her to stay silent, to pull her back into safety. But something in Lucia's tone made her pause. It was not affiance for the sake of rebellion. It was truth. How? Rick barked suddenly. How could you possibly learn 9 languages? Do you expect me to believe public school handed you that? He leaned forward, his voice curling like smoke. Do you expect me to believe your mother, a janitor, gave you that? The insult landed like a slap, and Carmen's throat burned with unshed tears. She wanted to disappear, but her daughter's voice rose before she could even open her mouth. No, Lucia said simply. She gave me more. Rick blinked. Lucia's voice grew steadier, warmer, carrying not only confidence but a reverence that filled the cold room. The New York Public Library offers free language classes after school. Every week I walked there. I studied until the lights dimmed, until the librarians told me it was time to go home. I had teachers, yes, but not the kind you pay. She drew in a slow breath, and her gaze didn't leave Rick's face. Mr. Ahmed teaches Arabic on Thursdays. He was a literature professor in Damascus. Now he drives a taxi. Mrs. Wong teaches Mandarin on Tuesdays. She once led an entire department in Beijing. Now she lives in a small apartment over a laundromat. Ms. Rossi volunteers Italian lessons on Saturdays. She cleans houses by day, teaches us by night. Her words carried no anger, only a quiet strength that made the room pulse with meaning. They aren't rich like you, but they are rich in knowledge, and they share it. They gave me their time, their patience, their wisdom. That's how I learned. Carmen's hand, still gripping the cart, loosened slowly. Her shoulders lifted, almost against her will, as if her daughter's words had placed invisible hands beneath her, urging her to stand taller. Rick opened his mouth, then shut it. The mockery he had sharpened for years, the cold armor of arrogance he had worn his whole life, it all felt suddenly thin, like cracked glass about to shatter. Lucia's voice dipped lower, but its firmness never faltered. You laugh at my mother because she cleans your office. You laugh at me because of my skin, my age, my school. But the truth is simple, Mr. Sullivan. Knowledge doesn't live in your marble floors. It doesn't hide inside your watch or your paintings. It lives in the places you've never bothered to look, in the voices you ignore, in the people you call invisible. The air was heavy, charged, the kind of silence that pressed on the chest like weight. Carmen's eyes blurred with tears she no longer fought to hold back. For the first time in 8 years, she felt her daughter's words painting a door where she had only seen walls. Rick stared at the manuscript on the table. His mocking grin faltered, not gone, but trembling, as though it had finally met something stronger than itself. His voice was lower when he finally spoke. Go on then, he whispered, flicking his chin toward the brittle pages. If you're so certain, show me. Lucia took a breath. Her fingers brushed the fragile parchment, her eyes scanning the intricate strokes. The air seemed to lean toward her, waiting. And then softly, she began to read. Lucia's small hand rested on the brittle parchment, her fingertips tracing the faded ink as though she were greeting an old friend. The air inside the 52nd floor office shifted, subtle at first, like the hush before the first note of a symphony. Carmen held her breath, afraid even the sound of her lungs would shatter the fragile silence. Rick leaned forward in his chair, his smirk stretched thin, waiting for the stumble, the moment he could pounce. But then Lucia's lips parted, and what spilled out wasn't a stumble. The first sound was sharp, deliberate, each syllable in classical Chinese cutting clean as strokes of a brush across paper. Her young voice carried the weight of an empire's history, tones rising and falling with a precision that made the marble walls seem to tremble. Rick froze. He couldn't understand the words, but he knew he was hearing something real, something alive. Lucia turned the page slightly, her voice shifting like water changing course. Now the language curled and rolled, liquid and melodic, classical Arabic flowing from her tongue like silk woven in air. The rhythm was mesmerizing, the words laced with a beauty Carmen had never heard before, though she didn't need translation to feel their power. Rick's jaw tightened. His hand twitched against the armrest of his leather chair. He wanted to laugh again, to break the spell, but the sound caught in his throat. Then came Sanskrit, heavy and resonant, each syllable landing like ancient stone laid into the foundation of a temple. The room felt older, holier, as though time itself had stopped to listen. Carmen's eyes blurred with tears. She remembered nights when her daughter studied under a flickering bulb, whispering words she could not understand, her lips moving in rhythm as though the sounds themselves gave her strength. And now, here it was, proof, not just to a billionaire, but to the world. Lucia did not falter. Her voice shifted again, firm and steady, sliding into the clipped edges of ancient Hebrew. The consonants snapped like firewood. The vowels stretched like string pulled taut. Then Persian followed, lyrical and soaring, painting colors into the sterile air of the office. Finally, she moved into medieval Latin, her voice smooth and authoritative, echoing like a sermon in a cathedral. One by one, the 6 ancient languages flowed from her as if she were pulling them out of the walls themselves, as if they had been waiting all these years for someone brave enough to bring them back to life. Rick Sullivan sat completely still, his smirk gone, his lips parted slightly. The chandelier's crystals threw fractured light across his face, and for the first time in years, there was no arrogance there, only disbelief. Lucia closed the manuscript gently, her small hand pressing it flat against the table. She lifted her eyes, calm and steady, her voice almost whispering now, though it carried louder than Rick's laughter ever had. "Do you want me to translate the meaning for you?" Rick swallowed, his throat dry. He had faced boardrooms full of enemies, rival billionaires clawing for his empire, senators and lawyers with daggers hidden in their smiles, but never had he felt so cornered, so stripped bare. A single word left his lips, almost against his will. Yes. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence that followed, taut and electric. Carmen pressed a hand to her chest, tears sliding freely down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from shame anymore. She was crying because the girl she had raised in the shadows was now standing in the light, teaching the man who thought he owned the world what true power sounded like. Lucia glanced down at the manuscript once more. Her voice was gentle but sure, her words carrying the weight of centuries. "It speaks of wisdom," she said. "It says true wisdom isn't found in palaces of gold but in a humble heart. True wealth isn't in money, but in seeing the dignity of every person. True power doesn't humiliate, it lifts others up." Her words struck like a hammer against marble. Rick shifted in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests, as though the room itself had turned against him. And for the first time in the history of the 52nd floor, the silence belonged not to him, but to the girl in worn shoes and a second-hand backpack. Rick sat rigid in his chair, but inside, his chest was tightening as though invisible hands were pressing down on him. He had designed this office to make everyone else feel small, the chandelier heavy above them, the paintings towering like judges, the cold marble desk that separated him from whoever dared to stand before him. Yet now, with a 12-year-old girl standing on the other side of that desk, it was he who felt small. Lucia's hand lingered on the manuscript, her fingertips steady against the ancient page as though she was drawing strength from it. Her gaze lifted slowly to Rick, her voice calm, unhurried, but carrying a force that turned the air heavy. "The text has layers," she said softly. "It doesn't only instruct, it reflects, it speaks in mirrors." Rick blinked, confusion flickering for a second. He opened his mouth to cut her off to reclaim control, but she pressed forward before he could summon the words. "The first layer," she said, her voice gaining rhythm, "is instruction. It warns that those who use wealth to measure themselves above others are the poorest of all, because they've lost the ability to see light in anyone else. Those who humiliate others are weak because they need people to shrink just so they can pretend to stand tall." The words didn't land like a lecture. They landed like stones dropped into water, rippling outward, pressing into the silence. Carmen gasped softly, her eyes stinging, her hands trembling around the cart's handle. She had lived these truths, though she'd never dared to say them aloud. Hearing them now, spoken in her daughter's voice, felt like a door opening in her chest. Rick shifted. The leather of his chair creaked under the weight of his unease. His instinct screamed at him to fight back, to laugh, to dismiss, but the laugh wouldn't come. His tongue felt heavy, useless. Lucia turned another page, her eyes, scanning the lines before speaking again. "The second layer is metaphor," she continued, her tone rich, unwavering. "The manuscript uses a river to describe language. Water changes its name in each land, its color in each place it flows, yet it remains water. People are the same. Their skin changes, their accents, their clothes, their jobs, but they remain human. Their dignity does not change." When she spoke that last word, dignity, her eyes held on Rick's. The room tightened with silence. Carmen's throat caught, because that word was her life. The countless times she had been called the cleaning lady, the times she'd been ordered to work faster as though she were a machine, the years of being invisible. Dignity was the thing she had always known she had, even when no one else saw it. And now, her daughter was saying it aloud, forcing it into the marble-clad air of the 52nd floor. Rick's fingers twitched against the desk. He looked down at the stone surface, but the comfort it once gave him was gone. His mind raced with excuses, with numbers, with jargon, but none of it fit here. The words felt brittle, meaningless against the weight of a child speaking truth. Lucia's palm moved to the final page. Her voice softened, but its softness carried sharpness, like a blade hidden in silk. The third layer, she said, is choice. The manuscript says that when the powerful realize they've been blind to the wisdom all around them, that is the moment they face two paths: awaken or condemn themselves. The word condemn dropped into the silence like a stone into a well, echoing deeper and deeper until it was unbearable. Rick swallowed hard. The room seemed smaller, the chandelier above suddenly heavier, pressing down on him. He felt stripped, unmasked. The wealth, the watch, the glass walls, none of it shielded him from the truth laid bare in a little girl's voice. For the first time in his adult life, Rick Sullivan didn't know what to say. He looked into Lucia's eyes, expecting anger or smugness, but found neither. Her gaze wasn't mocking. It was steady, piercing, almost sorrowful. She wasn't trying to destroy him. She was offering him a mirror. And what he saw in that mirror was terrifying. The silence was unbearable. Rick's throat felt dry, his tongue heavy. He had built empires out of words, sliced competitors apart with a single sentence, humiliated men twice his age with rehearsed mockery. But now, facing a 12-year-old girl whose voice carried the weight of centuries, he had nothing. Lucia closed the manuscript gently, her small hand resting on the brittle cover. She didn't rush. She let the quiet linger, let the weight of her words settle deep into the marble and glass of the 52nd floor. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured, calm, but sharp enough to slice through the last defenses Rick had tried to build. "You said you were sorry," she said softly, her gaze fixed on him. "But words aren't enough. They never are. If you really mean it, then you'll prove it with what you do." Carmen stiffened, her eyes darting between her daughter and the man who signed her paychecks. Fear pressed at her ribs, but so did a strange, swelling pride. This was her daughter, unshaken, unafraid, speaking truth in a place where Carmen had been forced into silence for 8 long years. Rick tried to clear his throat, his voice breaking slightly as he forced out a reply. What do you want from me?" Lucia straightened her shoulders, her expression steady, her tone almost solemn. "3 things," she said. "If you do them, your apology will mean something. If not, your words will stay empty." Rick's chest tightened. He wasn't used to being given conditions. He was the one who made them. Yet somehow, in this moment, he knew he would listen. Lucia raised her first finger. "1," she said firmly. "You apologize to my mother properly, not just for today, but for all the years you treated her like she was invisible. You say her name, her full name, and you look her in the eyes when you do it." Carmen's breath caught. Tears burned in her eyes. In 8 years of working here, no one had spoken those words aloud. No one had demanded that her name mattered. Rick's jaw tightened. He swallowed hard and turned slowly toward Carmen. His voice trembled softer than she'd ever heard it. "Carmen Johnson," he said. The name sounded foreign on his lips, as though he had never truly spoken it before. "I am sorry. I am sorry for treating you as less than a person. I am sorry for humiliating you in front of your daughter. I am sorry for never once asking about your life." Carmen's chest heaved, her tears falling freely now. She didn't answer, not yet, but for the first time in years she stood taller, no longer shrinking in the presence of marble and gold. Lucia raised her second finger. 2, you use your power to open doors, not close them. You will fund scholarships for students like me, for children from working families, from overlooked communities. You will give them opportunities that money has kept away. Not just a few for show, but enough to matter. At least 150 scholarships to start. Rick blinked, stunned at the precision in her demand. His instincts screamed to calculate ROI, to question feasibility, to spin it as PR. But the part of him that had just been stripped bare knew better. This wasn't negotiation. This was correction. Slowly he nodded. 150, he whispered. Agreed. Lucia lifted her last finger, her eyes so calm yet unyielding, locked onto his. 3. You learn what it means to start from zero. You will attend the public library every Tuesday night, after work. No assistants, no VIP rooms. You will sit at a wooden table with a pencil and a notebook, just like the rest of us. And I will teach you Mandarin. You will know what it feels like to stumble, to be corrected, to grow. Rick's heart pounded. The idea of sitting at a public table stripped of status, fumbling through tones like a child, it terrified him. Yet at the same time, a strange relief flickered at the edges of that fear. He had spent a lifetime hiding his weaknesses. What would it mean to finally face them? He gave a faint, almost self-mocking laugh, but it carried no cruelty now. Every Tuesday, he said. I'll be there. Lucia's gaze held on his a moment longer, searching for sincerity. For the first time, Rick didn't look away. Good, she said simply. Then your apology is real. And just like that, the balance of power on the 52nd floor shifted forever. It no longer belonged to marble floors or golden watches. It belonged to a girl with steady eyes, a mother who had stood invisible for years, and the truth they had spoken aloud. The library was nothing like the 52nd floor. There were no marble floors, no chandeliers dripping with light, no silent carpets swallowing footsteps. Instead, the air smelled of old paper and polished wood, of dust and ink and 100,000 stories stacked into the walls. The hum of the city was muffled here, replaced by the quiet shuffle of pages, the soft scratch of pencils, the low murmur of voices bent over study tables. Rick Sullivan stood at the entrance awkwardly, a plain notebook with grid lines in one hand and a sharpened pencil in the other. His suit still clung to him, though tonight it felt like a costume he couldn't take off. For the first time in decades, he had no assistant at his side, no secretary to arrange things, no power to lean on. He was alone, a billionaire among wooden tables. Lucia was already there. She sat at a scarred oak table, her backpack slouched against the chair, a navy hoodie pulled over her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, her expression calm, almost teacherly. No fear, no hesitation. She simply nodded at the empty chair across from her. You're late, she said softly. Rick checked his watch out of habit. He was 3 minutes past the hour. His throat tightened. No one ever told him he was late. People rearranged time for him. But here, the words landed with the weight of a rule. He swallowed and lowered himself into the chair. Phone's away, Lucia said, holding out her hand. Rick hesitated, then slipped his expensive smartphone from his pocket and placed it in her palm. She set it face down on the corner of the table like a confiscated toy. The room's air shifted. For the first time, Rick realized he wasn't the one setting the rules anymore. Lucia opened her own notebook. On the first page, in neat black ink, were 4 simple symbols, tone marks, 1 flat line, 1 rising line, 1 dipping then rising, 1 falling stroke. She looked up at him. Mandarin has 4 tones. They change the meaning of the word. Listen carefully. Her voice was crisp, clear as she spoke. Ma, 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 ma. Rick repeated, but the sounds collapsed in his mouth, clumsy and heavy. Ma, ma, ma. Lucia tilted her head, not unkindly. Better than the first time, she said. Try again. He tried again. Sweat prickled at the back of his neck. He could command boardrooms, manipulate senators, shut down billion-dollar deals with a flick of his words. But here, in front of a 12-year-old, he couldn't even say a single syllable correctly. Across the room, an older man lifted his head. His skin was dark, his hair flecked with gray. He gave Rick a small nod of encouragement. Lucia gestured toward him. This is Dr. Ahmed, she said. He was my Arabic teacher. He used to be a professor back in Damascus. Now he drives a taxi during the day, teaches here at night. Rick stood automatically, awkwardly offering his hand. Good evening, he said stiffly. Dr. Ahmed's smile was gentle, his English slow but graceful. Here we switch roles, Mr. Sullivan. You are student now. Humility is the common language. The words landed heavier than any insult Rick had ever faced. He sat down, gripping his pencil harder than necessary. Half an hour later, his notebook was filled with shaky strokes, 10 radicals scrawled again and again, tones written with clumsy arrows. His hand ached. His pride throbbed, but his heart felt strangely lighter. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing strength. He was allowed to be weak, to stumble, to fail without mockery. Lucia looked over his page. "Not bad," she said quietly. "But you'll need practice. 10 times each, every night. Next week we'll do greetings, simple sentences." Rick nodded, his voice lower, humbled. "Yes, next week." As he packed his notebook, he glanced around the library. An elderly woman was helping her grandson with math. A group of teenagers bent over textbooks. A man with calloused hands typed carefully on a library computer, lips moving with every word he wrote. None of them looked at him with awe or fear or envy. He was just another learner here, and for the first time in his life, that felt safe. When he stepped back into the Manhattan night, the glass towers above him seemed colder, harsher, but the wooden table he had just left behind, scarred, ordinary, surrounded by strangers, felt warmer than all the wealth in his world. Rick Sullivan, the man who had built his empire on humiliation and arrogance, was now carrying a notebook filled with mispronunciations, and strangely, he felt richer for it. The storm came fast. By the end of the week, the whispers had started in Sullivan Tech's boardroom. Men in tailored suits and women in sharp heels leaned across polished tables, smirking behind manicured hands. Rick had skipped a dinner with investors. He had left a gala early. He had been seen, God forbid, walking into a public library with a notebook under his arm. By Monday morning, the whispers had become daggers. "Have you heard? Our CEO's learning Mandarin from a child. He's lost his edge, spending money on janitor's scholarships while the market dips. Publicity stunt, obviously, but a sloppy one. He's going soft." Rick sat at the head of the long oak table listening. His face remained still, carved from the same stone he had always worn in meetings. But beneath it, his blood burned. For years, their laughter had been his weapon. Now it was turned against him. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said finally, his voice cool but low, "you think humility is weakness. That's why you'll never be more than shadows in my building." The room fell silent, though smirks lingered at the corners of their mouths. They didn't believe him. Not yet. But that afternoon, the backlash went public. On the subway walls, his company's new scholarship posters hung bright and hopeful. "The future speaks in every language. Apply today." A photo of a smiling student stood beneath the slogan, but on one poster, someone had scrawled over the girl's face in black spray paint. Words slashed across the page: fake, woke, fraud. By nightfall, social media had lit up. Some mocked him. Others applauded. Most didn't care about sincerity, only spectacle. Hashtags trended. Hashtag woke billionaire. Hat Mandarin Rick. Cartoons showed him in a suit, sitting at a tiny school desk with a dunce cap. Rick stared at the vandalized poster the next morning. Security had removed it, but he had demanded it be brought to his office. The letters burned into his eyes. Carmen stood by quietly, unsure if she should even be in the room. She watched him, waiting for the explosion of anger she had seen before. Chairs kicked, phones slammed, voices raised, but it didn't come. Instead, Rick reached for a frame, a heavy, expensive one, the kind reserved for artwork worth millions. Carefully, he placed the defaced poster inside and hung it on the wall behind his desk. Carmen frowned, confused. "Why? Why would you keep it?" she asked softly. Rick's voice was quiet, almost strange. "Because scars don't go away if you hide them. They stay so we don't forget where they came from. If I cover this up, I'll start to believe the lie again, that change is easy, that the world bends without fight. This stain stays here. As a reminder." Carmen's throat tightened. For years, she had seen this man as nothing but cruelty and arrogance. Now she saw something else. A man wrestling with himself. A man trying to hold on to a promise he never thought he'd make. That evening, Rick went to the library again. The whispers followed him there too. Someone had already seen the memes, recognized his face. But he sat at the same scarred wooden table, opened his notebook, and stumbled through tones and radicals under Lucia's patient gaze. Every syllable wrong, every correction humbling, every moment harder than it had to be. But he kept going. Because for the first time in his life, Rick Sullivan understood what real strength felt like. Not laughter at someone else's expense, but the will to endure laughter directed at you and to keep learning anyway. The change began quietly, almost invisibly, like the first crack in a sheet of ice. The scholarship applications opened online one Monday morning, and by nightfall, the server had crashed. Thousands of names flooded in, students from neighborhoods no one ever spoke of in glossy brochures, children who had been told all their lives that their futures ended at high school. Some typed their essays on library computers. Some wrote them on borrowed phones. Some attached scanned pages, messy handwriting scrawled on lined paper. Rick read the first batch late into the night. Alone in his penthouse, glass towers gleaming around him, he held pages filled not with polished grammar, but with raw fire. A girl who wanted to become a doctor because she had watched her grandmother die in a waiting room where no one came. A boy who fixed radios from the junkyard to teach himself engineering. A teenager who spoke 3 languages already, but cleaned offices after school so her family could afford rent. For the first time, Rick's chest ached, not with pride or anger, but with something he couldn't name. The ripple widened. The first recipients walked into Sullivan Tech in pressed shirts and worn shoes, carrying books instead of cleaning supplies. Carmen was there, watching from the corner as the HR director shook their hands. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw the plaque on the wall. The Johnson Scholars, opening doors where none existed. And still, it multiplied. The library filled to bursting on scholarship nights. Former taxi drivers, waitresses, and cleaners gathered as mentors. They taught languages, math, coding. A retired seamstress showed teenagers how to repair clothes for job interviews. A bus driver offered free rides on study nights. What had started as a billionaire's concession became a community's uprising. Carmen herself changed too. She no longer bowed her head when she entered Sullivan Tech. She no longer let her voice die in her throat. People began to notice her, asking her name, listening when she spoke, and every time she said Carmen Johnson, she felt the weight of those years of invisibility lift just a little more. Lucia, meanwhile, became the quiet axis of it all. She never raised her voice, never demanded the spotlight. Yet students followed her in the library, listening as she explained verb tenses or corrected tones with a patience far beyond her years. Adults leaned in too, doctors who had once driven cabs, scientists who had once scrubbed floors, all watching this child who had forced a billionaire to his knees. And even Rick, who had once mocked the very idea of humility, came every Tuesday, notebook in hand. He stumbled through Mandarin greetings, cheeks reddening when he forgot tones, shoulders hunched as Lucia gently corrected him. At first, the other learners had stared, whispering, but after weeks passed, he became just another student, another man struggling at a wooden table, another pair of hands gripping a pencil too tightly. The newspapers mocked him, the board grumbled, the hashtags flared and burned out, but inside the library, none of that mattered. What mattered were the voices once silenced, now filling the air in a dozen languages. One night, as the lamps glowed low over stacks of books, Rick looked around the crowded library. Children bent over notebooks. Mothers read aloud. Fathers stumbled through alphabets beside their kids. Carmen stood near the doorway watching, her eyes bright with tears. And for the first time in his life, Rick Sullivan felt the meaning of a word he had never truly understood. Legacy. Not buildings, not money, not glass towers stabbing the skyline, but this. Laughter in a library, scribbled notes, second chances, lives multiplying because one girl had refused to bow her head. It was then he knew he could never go back. The auditorium was packed. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Scholars from universities across the country sat in neat rows, their faces stern, expectant, skeptical. Journalists whispered into recorders, pens scratching on notepads. At the center of the stage stood a single wooden podium, its surface bare except for the fragile manuscript that had once sat in Rick Sullivan's glass-walled office on the 52nd floor, and beside it stood Lucia Johnson. She wore a simple dress, blue cotton, clean but plain, the kind a child might wear to church. Yet the way she stood, chin high, shoulders squared, gaze steady, made her look taller than the stage itself. Carmen sat in the front row, her hands trembling in her lap, her heart hammering so loudly she thought the whole auditorium might hear it. At the far end of the front row sat Rick Sullivan. He wasn't in his usual armor of power, no bespoke suit, no flashing watch. Tonight he wore a plain navy jacket and a white shirt, the sleeves rolled at the cuffs. His hair was swept back neatly, but there was no arrogance in his face, only a strange stillness, like a man who knew his role was no longer to command, but to witness. A professor with silver-rimmed glasses adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "Young lady," he said, his tone clipped, careful, as though every word were weighed. "You claim to have translated passages of this manuscript. Today, before this audience, we ask you to demonstrate. Begin when you're ready." Lucia nodded. She opened the manuscript with gentle hands, the brittle pages whispering as though exhaling centuries of silence. She took a slow breath, then began to read, first in the original tongues, the ancient syllables flowing from her lips with a clarity that filled the hall. Classical Chinese rolled like ink on water. Arabic curled through the air like smos. Tea. Sanskrit resonated, deep and steady. Hebrew snapped with precision. Persian rose like song. Latin rang like the echo of a cathedral. The scholars shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, brows furrowed in disbelief. Others scribbled furiously, their pens struggling to keep up. The room was hushed, reverent. Then she stopped. Her gaze lifted from the page and she spoke in English, her voice calm but carrying to the furthest row. "The manuscript says this: true wealth is not in gold or marble towers. It is in lifting those who are bowed down. True wisdom is not in titles or coins. It is in seeing the humanity of every face. True power is not in making others small. It is in making them greater than yourself." Her words landed like thunder in the silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, a ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling until the whole hall shook with it. The scholars rose to their feet. The cameras clicked furiously. Reporters rushed to capture every word. But Carmen saw none of them. Her eyes were locked on her daughter, tears streaming freely, pride swelling so fiercely it nearly broke her chest. And then Rick stood. He didn't go to the podium. He didn't steal the moment. He stepped to the side of the stage, a microphone in his hand, his voice low but steady. "Lucia Johnson has reminded me, and all of us, that money without dignity is empty, power without humility is poison, and success without lifting others is failure." He paused, the weight of the words pressing into every corner of the hall. "That is why today I am announcing the creation of the Lucia Johnson Foundation for Human Dignity." Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters surged forward. Rick lifted his hand. $500 million will be placed into this foundation, but I will not lead it. Power belongs where it was earned. Carmen Johnson will serve as director. This foundation will not be a monument to me, but to every overlooked voice that carries wisdom the world refuses to hear. The hall erupted. Flash bulbs exploded. Carmen covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head as though refusing to believe, but the tears spilling down her cheeks betray at her heart. Rick turned toward her, his voice gentler now. "Carmen Johnson," he said, the name firm on his tongue, no longer foreign. "The world will know what I failed to see for years, that dignity begins with the ones we call invisible." Behind him on a screen, the foundation's emblem appeared, the defaced scholarship poster, not cleaned, not restored, but preserved exactly as it had been found. Black spray paint slashed across the smiling girl's face. Beneath it, in bold letters, "Stain kept to remember." The hall fell into stunned silence once more. Then thunderous applause rose again, not for the billionaire on stage, but for the girl who had refused to bow her head. And in that moment, the balance of power in the world shifted. Not in the boardrooms, not in the towers of glass, but in the heart of a 12-year-old girl who spoke 9 languages and taught a billionaire how to finally listen.